interesting because the Taliban has also said that they welcome Chinese development, essentially. That was one of the things that they talked about. They welcome Chinese development opportunities in Afghanistan. And China's had some trouble with their development in Afghanistan so far. Like they have two major projects in Afghanistan, both of which have had huge issues and are not very successful. So it's interesting to see whether the Taliban will actually be able to get more Chinese investment.
I think that's exactly, Shelley, the challenge, which is to say they've had these problems in the past, but now if China comes in and becomes this kind of unseen benefactor, if you will, that's maneuvering behind the scenes and helps the Taliban help negotiate some kind of financial deal with the United States, because I don't think this administration is going to do what many of us would think what should be done, which is to roll back in there with massive amount of military force and physically rescue our people. That's not going to happen probably. And so how do we get our people out? Well, somebody's going to have to pay. Just like the Iran nuclear deal, there's probably going to be some kind of payment made. And so China's probably negotiating with the Taliban to help them get as much as they can. And then for every amount of help that China makes in that effort, they're going to ask the Taliban to say, listen, we don't want to occupy you. We don't want anything else. We just want to do business. And part of that business is for us to be able to set up a few, ore and mining camps or whatever it is, and have this road that goes through that connects the China-Pakistan economic corridor. You got to help us on that. And if you don't, then we're going to have some problems. But they won't say those kind of negative things up front. What they'll just say is this can be a win-win situation. We can help you negotiate with the United States and get as much as you want. And you can help us by making sure that when we do have some investments there, that you're not allowing them to be destroyed by, people like they've done in the past. I think that's where China may be mistaken, because we have hundreds of years of history of what happens in Afghanistan. And I don't think the tribes are going to be controlled like that, but you never know.
Well, so that's the interesting thing to me, because, maybe this is just because I have an American perspective and I don't think the Taliban is, a trustworthy, great group of guys. But does China really think they can work with the Taliban without some kind of sudden but inevitable betrayal?
I think when you read what, the Chinese Communist Party writes about their form of global governance and the way that they think that they can maneuver, and that their superior form, there's going to be an element in China, an arrogant element that's going to say, listen, we're better. We're better than the Russians. We're better than the Brits. We're better than the Americans who came in with a hammer. And we can come in with our comprehensive national power, and we can use soft power, and we can use information, and we can use money, and we can make this a win-win. And if we can do this, comrades, they'll say, then this will be the final coup de grace that'll show that our form of governance is superior to Western liberal democracy. And I think that argument's probably being discussed inside the great halls in Beijing. And so I think that's really the challenge is, can they pull that off? And my look at history says it's going to be it's a gamble, because the Taliban is not a single entity. It's a tribal communal organization, or a society. Each area has its own tribal ruler, and they're not all equal, and they don't all obey each other. And so how does China get in and do that? Do they send their diplomats into each area and try to establish relations? Well, America tried that over the last 20 years, and it didn't really work so well. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think China will be able to offer the Taliban, like they do in many other places, this kind of, I'll give you all this without strings attached. Up front, it'll be, I'll give you $10 million or $10 billion, and you don't have to pay me any interest for 5 years or 10 years. And then see how things go after 5 or 10 years. And then if the stability comes, then the Chinese can start putting on, give me a little bit more here, give me a little bit more. Oh, now we need 1.1%, interest or whatever it is. And so that'll be the challenge to see how they do that. So I think they're going to try that because they need to have a buffer. And they're constantly concerned about the buffering of their nation. They feel like they're surrounded. They feel like they're encircled. So this would give them another buffer in a geographical sense. They also have the Belt and Road and this economic Silk Road that they want to build. And this would be another great way to help cement some of that into existence. I don't expect we're going to see Chinese military rolling in there in tanks or aircraft anytime soon. I just don't think the Chinese are that. They're not going to do that. They've seen enough now in 20 years that they know that they cannot do that. So they're going to try to do it through other methods.
It'll be the typical kind of Belt and Road colonization that we're seeing around the world in Afghanistan.
Right. And what will challenge that will be the Taliban's response. To them, this may be something that they've never experienced before, because before everybody's come in with an AK-47 or an M16 and shoved it in their face and said, obey. So if somebody comes in with a box of cash and says, I give you cash, you give me rocks, maybe that works.
And to what you said earlier, that would be a way for China to say, like, look, all of these other empires failed in Afghanistan, but we win because we use our own, specific socialism with Chinese characteristics. Win-win mutual cooperation.
They're going to sell it as a win-win. The question becomes, the PRC and the Communist Party has this penchant for total control. And so, are they going to be able to accept working with a partner that's, doesn't have the same kind of standards for control? I mean, we know in Xinjiang, the Chinese have installed, thousands and hundreds of thousands of cameras and sensors, and nobody can move around without the party's command centers watching people and facial recognition. I don't think the Chinese Communist Party wants to do that in Afghanistan, but they're going to want to have some form of awareness of what's going on, I think. And it's going to be hard for them to get that because the Taliban won't want that.
Well, I wouldn't be too surprised if the Taliban wouldn't mind having under their control some of that Chinese surveillance, like to be able to monitor the people of Afghanistan a little more.
How about the Chinese invest money to make Kabul a Huawei smart city?
There you go.
Yeah. I mean,
don't give them any help.
Yeah, quite. That's what they're probably doing.
Well, it's probably not the problem, though. It's like what happens in the areas where they're going to be building their mines, right?
Yeah. So yeah, Jim, you made a good point about how like the Taliban isn't like a single unified thing. Because in Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban has actually carried out terrorist attacks on several Chinese projects there. So that's an example of how like this is not it's not like a country that China deals with previously.
Well, and Chris, that attack you just mentioned, it was on your show a night or two ago. You covered it. When you watch the press from China, that didn't really get above the fold coverage. It wasn't like they were harping on it. I mean, they'd harp more on who's that doctor in Germany, Adrian Zenz, and his coverage of the Uyghurs. I mean, they obsess about somebody like that and will cover that guy every day for 13 days or something, or Pompeo's speech or something like that. They'll fixate on, and it's really bothering the party leaders. But this thing that happened in Pakistan, they covered it. They were upset, not happy, but it wasn't like a break with Pakistan. It was something that they said, okay, we're going to have to deal with this.
Well, because it's despite their whole wolf warrior diplomacy kind of thing, really, at the end of the day, all those attacks did was like, what? It killed one Chinese worker. The party doesn't care about the life of one Chinese citizen as long as the overall development package with Pakistan is not actually being interfered with.
Not unless you're the chief financial officer of Huawei in Canada.
Oh.
Then they care.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't think the party cares about Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. Like, I think that what they're doing is they're using her as a political tool to test Canada and the U.S. and using it as a political tool to attack the U.S. and attack Canada and have an excuse to do other things to Canadians in China. So, like, they could just as easily bring Meng Wanzhou back to China and then, put her in the Shuanggui, like the party, detention system. look at what the Communist Party has done to so many, wealthy or connected people. Is they just lock them up anyway. So it's not like the party cares about her as an individual. And I think party philosophy, from the days of Mao was very clear that like it's not a nation where individual life is important. It's a nation where like you follow the party and the party is important. And if we have to sacrifice, what did Mao say? Like if we lose half the population in nuclear war, it's not a big deal because, we're a big country and we, can make more people. I mean, it's just this kind of brutal.
Currently, they're not having a great time making more people.
Well, Mao didn't foresee that.
Yeah.
Well, I think with Meng, there's an extra thing about what does she know? And could they be afraid that she would try to cut some kind of deal with the Americans?
Tell some of the Huawei secrets?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably unlikely, but it's
unlikely
not
that
impossible.
She would, not unlikely that she knows, right?
Right. Unlikely that she would actually cut a deal, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. She's probably better off in Canada under, house arrest in her big, beautiful mansion than going back to China at this point.
But I think back to Afghanistan, your point is, I agree. It's not the individual, it's what it means that they will use an individual to make or break a deal or make a position on something. And so in this case in Pakistan, one Chinese national was killed, and it didn't have any really bearing on the overall China-Pakistan relationship. I'm sure behind the scenes, there's probably a few harsh letters and calls and things of that nature. And I'm sure Khan, the prime minister of Pakistan, said, hey, we're working it. And China will say, okay, got it. As long as we have good faith effort that you're working it. And I think that kind of model is what you're going to see play out in Afghanistan.